Good afternoon, everyone. This is Caitlin Molina, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Early Education and Care. Sorry, we're running a few minutes late, a few technical difficulties. We're just going to give everyone a moment to come into the room, and then we'll begin our presentation and solicit some questions from our educators and program leaders. Eli, can you just confirm for me that we have educators and programs?
Yes, we have
Okay.
about 143 attendees right now.
Okay, perfect. I just can't see folks.
And yes, I know that folks said that they're muted. Once we get the present, that's part of the webinar feature, but we'll make sure to be soliciting questions during the presentation.
While we're waiting for folks to trickle in, we are continually getting some questions. I just want to reiterate that while we made some adjustments for family childcare educators to streamline the hiring process for their assistants, this webinar is really focused on group and school age programs and out of school time programs and the revised hiring requirements for those educators. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to share my screen and then we can get started with some of the opening remarks and intros. Okay, excellent. So again, my name is Caitlin Molina and I'm Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Early Education and Care. I want to thank all of you for taking the opportunity to come together today to provide some feedback and ask questions related to the revised educator qualifications policy that was released by EEC on Friday. I want to make sure all of our educators and program administrators who are on the call today have seen that there was an updated version of the policy that was released, and we are actively working to resolve communication issues or miscommunication that may have occurred as a result of the release. Really appreciate everyone's time today. And so we're going to start with some framing around the department's intent for the revised policy, some of the immediate flexibilities and opportunities that are represented within the policy, and also some discussion around for the future additional clarifications that the agency can make to support you all as program leaders and administrators in hiring educators to support our children and families. So first, I just want to say welcome. I am joined on this call with the esteemed Teacher Qualifications Unit. As you all know, they are a very important piece and element to our team at EEC. They have really been working to advise us on the development of this revised policy and support sort of implementation and technical assistance to our providers and educators who are working to adopt this revised policy. So Alicia Wells, who's our supervisor for the Teacher Qualifications Unit, is on, as well as our other members of the team. I'll walk through the key objectives for the office hours. I will at a high level review the minimum hiring requirements policy that was released on Friday. I will begin to solicit some feedback from all of you around future clarifications or other items that we might need to resolve to provide additional support to you all in managing the new policy. And I will also kind of preview for you feedback that we've heard to date that will hopefully mitigate some of the duplicate questions that we've received, and really just kind of reinforcing some of the immediate modifications and revisions that we've made in direct response to feedback that we've heard from our esteemed colleagues in the field. There is an appendix to this deck that we can send out and post on our website that really just reiterates some of the future state work that EEC has underway to support. As a reminder, this minimum hiring requirements for educators policy is an interim step as we prepare for a more long-term strategy and support for building out credential for our early educators across the Commonwealth. So our key objectives this afternoon is we really want to support you all as educators and program leaders in understanding and applying the minimum hiring requirements for educators policy to their current and prospective hiring. As a reminder, this policy does not necessarily pertain to those individuals or candidates you've already hired unless they're looking to adjust their role. This is really a policy that you can use moving forward to assume a little bit more autonomy and flexibility in hiring educators at your program. We're going to continually collect frequently asked questions. I want to thank you for those who have either sent us to the commissioner's inbox or provided questions through registration that we are able to kind of collect, synthesize, and provide high-level response and revisions to. So I appreciate those that have sent those in advance of the office hours. We're going to continually seek that input and that feedback. As you all know, I've been in state government for a few years. I'm relatively new to EEC. And one of the things that I love most about this agency is our willingness to receive feedback, think comprehensively around where we may have missed or what we need to do better, and then respond systematically to those concerns or that feedback. And so I really appreciate folks coming onto this webinar, providing some constructive opportunities for us to enhance or support your implementation of the policy. So we will continue to identify those opportunities for future clarification, and then to offer technical assistance on more complex hiring decisions. So while EEC will no longer be certifying teachers through our traditional TQ process, it is our commitment to remain available to support you in understanding the policy. And particularly, we will preserve the TQ process for those Chapter 74 applications for high school students in the vocational programs. And we will also maintain dedicated technical assistance for some of the more complicated international applications or candidates who require a deeper dive in terms of their coursework or work experience qualifications. So at a high glance, it's a long document, and so I would appreciate that it takes a little bit of time for folks to digest the content. The goal of the policy was really to introduce increased flexibility. So we had heard from both licensors, programs, educators, families that the current process and the way in which we were through paper certifying and approving teachers for early education and care settings was not working. And so what we did was we really looked at both the operational impact of the certification process and the policy itself to make some immediate flexibilities to allow you as program leaders, as experts in the field, to make independent hiring decisions, not subjected to the EEC approval process. And so EEC has really committed to maintaining a path where we will support you in making decisions. We will certainly provide technical assistance, but the policy was really intended to provide additional options, more flexibility, and to eliminate the barrier that was the paper process for TQ certification. So just to reiterate operationally, the TQ, the teacher qualifications application process is eliminated. For those who have already submitted applications, as outlined in the protocol document that was shared on Friday, our team has made a commitment to continuing to look through those applications and certifying them. So for our candidates who have already put the time in to producing an application and sending it to EEC, we will value that time and will absolutely review and certify. We've already modified our incomplete letters so that when someone has already applied to us, we will respond if their application was incomplete and give them the option to either resubmit with the incorrect, the missing information, or we will allow them the opportunity to retract their application and work directly with their program administrator to meet the hiring requirements outlined by that program. So just to reiterate, program leaders will be validating their teacher qualifications at the program level. They will utilize the policy to institute more flexible standards, and will really work collaboratively with staff and prospective candidates to define a path forward. This is not a long-term plan. This is an interim step as we build out a professional registry and really design a competency-based credential that will support educators a little bit more long-term in thinking not just about their present journey, but in the future where they want to be as a professional and an early childhood educator. Some of the qualification changes is that we've broadened the way that programs can determine requirements. So we now have reciprocity or an accepting of DESE teacher licenses. We are less restrictive, and we found more responsive ways for educators to engage in preparation and coursework. We have expanded specific common courses as an opportunity to offer options, not to further restrict what may have been confusing. And really, I just want to reiterate this because I know that it was not always received. And so want to reiterate that the intent here was to create additional options and additional flexibility for the field. And so while that may not have been received as the intent, I want to reiterate that the commitment from EEC was to provide much needed relief to the field to be able to more quickly hire qualified candidates to support teaching and learning in your classrooms. Boy, have I heard from a lot of you, and I've heard a lot from the commissioner directly around feedback that we've gotten on the policy. And I want to say that one of the most important elements of the team that I manage here at EEC is not just about the content and the quality of the policy release. It's about our ability to revisit that policy based on the feedback from our experts in the field. And so I just want to thank each of you for taking the time to patiently outline constructively where we may have missed the mark or where we may not have been clear enough in our expectations of you as program leaders and experts to adopt the policy. We have committed, and we've committed quickly, to resolving components that are unclear or had unintended consequences. Specifically, anything that anything that in the policy that you feel might be more restrictive or more conservative than what was currently in place at EEC, that was not the intent. So we have really worked hard to reorganize and restructure some of the content of the policy so that it is very clear to the field that these are additional options, additional pathways, and should by no means be added restrictions for programs to make decisions around hiring. Our intent, as previously communicated, was to eliminate the TQ verification process for new candidates. We knew there was a backlog. We knew our paper processes were not working, and we were working very hard to build a new registry that would be more responsive and supportive to the credential that we're looking to build. We wanted to provide increased flexibility and then allowing some coursework to be completed after hire. And so we've broadened our terminology and our definition of equivalency to allow for CEUs and other professional development plans, recognizing that a pursuit of a degree or a pursuit of CEUs is oftentimes just as valuable as the actual achievement of the CEU. And so that was a real intention behind the development of the policy. We wanted to broaden the types of permitted educator preparation programs and certificates that we would accept, or at least allow programs to review and validate as part of the policy. And we wanted to update the criteria for prior work experience to allow for any activity where a candidate may have demonstrated competency for the role they are recruited to serve in. So I think that last one is really important. I think for us, we heard that maybe a candidate didn't have direct experience in a classroom, but they had a wealth of experience working directly with children and families. And so there was an immediate need and ask of EEC to reevaluate the definitions for work experience to provide more flexibility to programs to hire candidates based on that experience. I just want to reiterate, because I think that this will mitigate some of the confusion, some of the opportunities and concerns that we've already heard and have already resolved within the policy, but recognizing there may be additional feedback. But the ones that we've heard so far that we've been able to immediately resolve, I want to outline those so that we can mitigate some of the confusion up front. There was an error in how we outlined age requirements. So the clarification here is that we've amended the policy to clarify that lead teachers must be 21 years of age or older, or have a high school diploma or equivalent. So just want to clarify that that was updated in the revised policy. We also clarified age for assistant teachers. So the policy was amended to say who are 16 years or older, and are required and are not required to complete a vocational program. So I hope that that clarifies. We heard a lot from programs around support staff, floaters, and also specifically assistant teachers. And so that age clarification and the non-requirement to complete a vocational program was something that we were able to reconcile rather quickly. In terms of director group leader requirements, it was not our intent to create more requirements under that specific role. So we did amend the policy to clarify that previous qualification requirements for these roles are still accepted. So the additional columns in that policy were really represented to provide additional options. And this is the same for the group leader in the out of school time program. Credits, I think we just wanted to further define and expand upon what we mean when we say or equivalency. And so we talked about being able to accept CEUs, professional development plans, and that the credit bearing requirements for educators post-hire can consist of any of these. And when we talk about post-hire, we typically talk about a time frame which is within 6 months. So hopefully upfront, these clarifications will provide some support to those of you who are still wrestling with implications and understanding of the policy. So I'm going to pause there and stop sharing my screen. That was some of the framing that I wanted to bring forward. I also want to acknowledge that a lot of the feedback I've heard is that the timing of the email was inconvenient to program leaders. And I want to acknowledge that I've heard that feedback and that is something that we have taken very seriously. I am very cognizant of the hard work and the effort that each of you put into serving children and families each and every day. And it was certainly not the intention to add additional stress by creating a new policy or introducing that policy at the end of a workday or at the end of a work week. So definitely have heard that piece of feedback and is something that we will look to modify moving forward. There have been a number of frequently asked questions, and so I want to invite my colleague, Alicia Wells, to address high-level themes or kind of consistent areas of confusion that she's been hearing from the field and has been able to respond to.
Thanks, Caitlin. So one of the things that is obviously the CARE course has been the #1 question that has come forth through our email box, as well as I'm noticing in the Q&A chat, is that course going to still be accepted to meeting the Category 1 Child Growth and Development course for teacher level qualifications? Yes, we will still accept the CARE course as an acceptable course. If you notice in the revised document, we do indicate which training institutes that are acceptable to EEC. We won't list individual courses that we accept, but we will list a acceptable training institute as to where you can complete the CEU. So I believe it is on page 24, I believe, of the requirement documents. You'll see the list of acceptable training institute that EEC will accept towards CEUs. The next question, which Caitlin has addressed already, is the Chapter 74. That's probably the second most asked question that we received. In the protocol document on page 3, we do indicate that the Chapter 74 and EEC approved high school programs will still be reviewed by the TQ unit after their minimum requirements are completed after graduation. The normal process that EEC will send out an email to those high schools indicating what documentation is to be submitted and how they should submit their documentations for certification. So again, the Chapter 74 and the Voc Tech career programs in Massachusetts will still be processed by the TQ unit. The next question is about international education. So those would be coursework or degrees obtained outside of the US. So your programs will still qualify staff on site. However, you can reach out to TQ if you need assistance on reviewing those requirements. We understand there can be some complexities surrounding what is accepted. The educator will still have to obtain the credentialing through a third-party agency. And so we've provided some information on which third-party agencies these educators should get their out of their international credentials reviewed, and so that it is translated into US standards. So indicating what degree type and what coursework is acceptable for qualifications. The next one, I believe, would be around the 50 hours equaling 1 month. So we do indicate that what work experience, the definition of work experience is indicated in the requirements document. If you want to note pages, let's see, pages 25 does discuss what supervised work experience, what the minimum requirements are, what unsupervised and out-of-state supervised work experience, and how to calculate. So the 50 hours of consistent cumulative work experience in one program will be equivalent to 1 month. And then the minimum is 12 hours per week. in periods of at least 4 weeks at one program. So we do define that on page 25 of the document. So scrolling through. I'll take a quick look at some of the questions inside the chat to see if there's some that we can answer. Then the other question that has been asked is, will you receive a certificate? So if you are in process, so if you've submitted your application prior to the release of these revised requirements, the TQ unit will still process those applications and issue a certificate. Anything's qualified at the program, the certificate will not be issued. Yes, licensing will come out and review the documentation that you have obtained to qualify your staff, but there will be no certificate process. Again, just to Caitlin mentioned how we are looking at the future credentialing process for our educators and for our field. So at this point in time, staff will be qualified on site with their documentation to be held at the program. Let's see if there's anything else that we can. A frequently asked question. Let's see. Caitlin, do you see anything that we could answer? A general question?
I'm seeing a lot of questions about care.com, and so I just want to further clarify that that is still accepted and that we would continue to honor that. Some clarification on the CEUs. So yes, previously as part of the teacher qualification process, CEUs were not accepted. That has changed. So now within the new policy, not for TQ submission, but within the new policy, CEUs can be treated as an equivalent to the coursework requirement. So I'm also seeing a lot of questions about staff who are transitioning between programs. And so I just want to reiterate that the program should use the hiring policy, should use the minimum requirements for hiring policy as a standard or as a framework. But yes, programs may have, as they currently do, may have different hiring standards based upon their programmatic design, the requirements of their handbook, and so forth. The intent of the professional registry that we are building would be to support reciprocity so that when educators transition across programs, there would be some sort of record that would follow them. In terms of licensor enforcement, the licensor is really just looking to make sure that you've reviewed both coursework and work experience in order to make your hire. So they are not actually reviewing your policy or your or enforcing your implementation of the policy. They're really trying to provide support, protecting time during their routine monitoring visit to ask if you have questions pertaining to new hires that you've made, and to make sure that you've kind of checked both sides of that requirement, the work experience and the coursework experience, and making sure that both are evaluated as part of your hiring decision. I'm seeing some questions about the work experience form, and so I just want to reiterate that the professional development packet, while we're not actually accepting applications to certify, we still have updated that packet with the work experience forms. So not that you're required to, but if you would like to as a program still require applicants to complete work experience forms, you certainly can. You'll note in the policy that we've offered some other options, which means if they have a letter of recommendation, you may as an employer choose that and replace that with the work experience form, or you may as an employer require both. So that's certainly, we updated that packet as a tool for you, but it's certainly not a requirement.
There's a question still surrounding work experience as far as internship hours. So work experience is defined as supervised work experience is experience in a direct care or teaching of a group of children on a regular basis. And historically, we've always accepted internships or practicums, the supervised practicums, but we also have a definition for unsupervised, which is at the program's discretion on how they would count the unsupervised work experience. So that's also detailed in the minimum requirements packet.
I'm hearing some question, or not hearing, I'm sorry. I'm seeing some questions about how we will evaluate in future state work experience and sort of the equivalency with the coursework. And so I think EEC is committed to doing some more engagement on the development of its credentials so that we can just begin to build out and be responsive to the field on how we want to weight those two components in future state for the credential. Just want to also reiterate that the application packet that we just referenced that should serve as a tool, we worked very quickly in 24 hours to update the policy based on your feedback. We need to now update that packet with the revised policy. So I just want to clarify that that will happen and that we will migrate the updated policy into that packet for you. If staff do not have a certificate, how do they show when moving from one program to another that they are certified? So again, I think that they would have their resume representing that they were hired at a program, but each individual program is able to adopt their own hiring requirements as long as it meets the minimum requirements outlined in EEC's policy. So the teacher certificate would no longer be issued by EEC, but they may still represent themselves as having the experience having worked in a program. I know our team is feverishly answering some of these questions directly in the chat, but trying to pick up on some of the high themes here. So just reiterating that the TQ team will no longer be issuing certificates for those that have already submitted applications. We have made a commitment to reviewing and accepting those. We've updated the incomplete letters to just provide candidates with the option, if they did not send a complete application in, to be able to either retract it to work directly with their employer, or they can resubmit with the complete application. And they're asking if there's going to be live FAQs written and posted on the website. It's our intent to actually, I think this is being recorded, and so we'll be able to post this as a resource for programs afterwards. How do we certify aides who have been with our programs already? So just want to reiterate, people who are already hired and either have certification or have been approved to work are not required to go through this new process. This process is intended for your prospective or new hires, and it's really an opportunity to create your own requirements in accordance with the EEC policy.
There's a question about converting CEUs to credits. The document does actually provide some guidance on how to convert continuing education units and its equivalency. And so that is on page 23, I believe, but towards the end of the minimum requirements, we do have what 4.5 CEUs equates to 3 CEUs and 1.5. And I actually will put it in the answer as well.
I'm seeing some questions. I just want to reiterate that these policies would not replace our licensing regulations for group size and ratio. And so the flexibility that was offered for assistant teachers is that if from shorter than 5 minutes, they need to utilize an assistant teacher to cover a break for a teacher, that is absolutely okay. But we are still closely adhering and enforcing our group size and ratio regulations. I'm hearing a little bit about unsupervised work experience. And so I think the intent of the policy was to give programs the autonomy to sort of define for your own hiring standards, what would be acceptable to you in terms of unsupervised work experience. And so as an employer, what are the different types of work experience that you would look for in making a hiring decision relative to a teacher or a teacher assistant? I just want to reiterate, because I'm seeing some concerns around citations. The licensing process is really to provide space for you all to ask questions. And so outlined in the protocols document, there is not an expectation that you will be cited regarding your interpretation of this policy. Our focus with licensing has really been to ensure compliance with BRC, first aid CPR certification, and early ed essentials. We understand that this is a new policy, and we really want to be supportive to programs who are making these independent hiring decisions to be able to ask questions during routine monitoring visits. If the licensor is not able to answer it, they will certainly have a process by which they can collect questions and bring those to their supervisors so that we can respond more comprehensively to trends and high-level concerns. And yes, you should maintain documentation of your teachers as you currently do. So instead of a teacher certification certificate, you would look to document both work experience and coursework experience as part of the hiring packet. You are not required to verify the work experience unless you choose to as an employer. So you can accept the work experience form, you can accept a letter of recommendation, you can make decisions independently as an employer on how you intend to validate or verify some of these pieces. We have revised the new staff record checklist, but you will note it broadly just asks that we review staff qualification files. And so really when we talk to licensors and we talk to programs, the expectation is again twofold. You have some sort of documentation to verify work experience, and you have some sort of documentation to verify your education coursework. Just want to reiterate that citations are not part of this initial launch, that we're really looking to provide technical assistance and to collect questions through routine monitoring visits that we can comprehensively and systemically solve for at a higher level. And yes, work experience could be represented in a resume. I'm seeing some questions around that too. I'm hearing some questions or seeing some questions around who maintains documentation on the hire. So as an employer, I would really strongly urge you to maintain that documentation on file. As an educator myself, I typically hold a portfolio, so I would maintain that documentation myself as an educator. It's certainly not an expectation that we're pushing out to educators, but I would say that it's best practice that not just the employer, but the educator maintain records of both their work experience and their coursework completion. Alicia, would you mind clarifying some of the care.com questions about the number of CEUs and whether or not that is covered under the child development standard?
Yeah. So we understand the care.com doesn't specifically meet what is stated in our minimum requirements. However, when we did have allowed that course over time, and we're going to continue to allow that course to meet the minimum requirements. I think that's where the confusion is where what care.com is noting as the number of CEUs isn't aligning with our minimum requirements. However, because we have approved that course in the past, we're going to continue to approve that course under these minimum requirements. So the care course is allowable.
And I just want to reiterate the design and implementation of this policy by no means was an expectation that programs go and start creating their own processes for certification or development of forms. It's really just to remove that step. So I want to make sure that we have given you parameters. There is not a need to develop additional forms. We really just, in terms of any industry, when you're hiring, you would want to look at the resume, you'd want to look at the work experience, and you'd want to look at the coursework experience to make sure that you are hiring a candidate that meets the minimum hiring requirement. And so just want to reiterate the intent there, and that we have certainly modified some of the forms to make sure that that process is simpler, but there's not an expectation or a requirement for you to use them. And yes, we've provided more flexibility so that people who are pursuing coursework can be accepted as part of that role and as part of your hiring. I'm hearing a lot of questions about how do we trust the work experience forms, or how do we trust the certificate or the completion of coursework. That is really up to you as an employer to feel comfortable with validation. So every employer may operate differently. I actually take this outside of the context of just early childhood. If I were to apply for a job, some employers may request references, actually call for transcripts in addition to a diploma. Others may just accept the diploma. In terms of the minimum hiring requirement policy and the protocols document that we previewed, it's not the expectation that you verify those documents. The expectation is that you maintain those documents on file and that you've made a decision as an employer that this candidate meets the minimum qualifications. I'm hearing a lot about like non-certified aides or support staff that are currently working in your programs, and what are the opportunities to move them into lead teacher roles. And so I think one of the biggest flexibilities is really in how we evaluate work experience and also the equivalencies. So their pursuit of CEUs and professional development and coursework can now be accepted. And so it's really about looking at the individual candidates, evaluating their experience, and then making a decision as a program about whether or not they meet your qualifications to become a lead teacher. These new requirements, so again, the intent was to be as flexible as possible. And so these remain in effect. So given that we've added additional options or layers into what was already implemented for programs, they are in effect now. As a reminder, just in terms of the enforcement piece, it's been our commitment to support you in answering questions and being able to be responsive to any concerns that arise as you work through the implementation of the policy. At this point in time, as we've outlined in the protocols, it is not an expectation that we would be citing. We're really working towards mutual understanding and appreciation for the policy. It is my expectation, as it always will be, that licensors support programs, and whether that means documenting noncompliances related to health and safety findings, that will continue. So again, the BRC, first aid CPR certification, and early ed essentials, these are all foundational requirements that we will continue to enforce through routine monitoring and licensing visits. So specific questions around categories, I just want to reiterate that the intention was to broaden the categories that could be utilized for coursework, and so not to limit. And so if there were specific references to categories of study that were removed in the updated policy, it was really because our introduction of those was a bit more conservative and more restrictive than what we had intended. So that was then resolved. We really wanted to provide more flexibility for employers to look at categories across all. Just want to reiterate that we have made a commitment to reviewing and certifying the applications that we've received to date. But moving forward, there is not an expectation, nor will we be reviewing and approving applications that come into the TQ unit. So as of December 6th, we are asking that programs maintain this documentation on file. That said, we're all aware of the backlog. We have made a commitment to working through that and aim to have all of those applications approved and certified by the end of March. If there are incomplete applications that come in, those candidates will be given the option to either resubmit a complete application or they can retract their application and work directly with their employer.
Okay, and I just want to jump in and just reiterate, for those looking to seek upgrades for lead teacher or director, those applications no longer be sent to the TQ unit. Programs can qualify upgrades on the program as well. And so we included what information, what documentation would be required for the upgraded. So applications for lead teacher and director will not be submitted to the TQ unit for processing and certification. So I just saw a couple of questions surrounding that as well.
Yep, and Chapter 74 is still processed by the TQ unit. I just want to acknowledge too that the TQ team will remain in place. We are building a new credential. We're launching a new professional registry. Their role in verifying and supporting programs and defining educator qualifications will continue to be an important piece to our agency's mission and vision. The technology or the systems that we use to support educators and being approved or qualified may shift, but their roles will not. And so during this interim phase, the TQ unit is really focused on reviewing previously submitted applications and then providing technical assistance to the field as they work to adopt these new requirements. There's some questions about why this may not have been piloted. I think in a lot of ways, we're treating this as a pilot, and a lot of the flexibilities that were created during the pandemic were in direct response to feedback that we heard from the field around the need to revisit our educator qualifications. And so one of the biggest shifts that we've made with board approval is to take the educator qualifications out of our regulations to create a policy which will enable us to have more flexibility to modify the policy as we hear feedback from the field. And so again, as a state servant and as someone who's really committed to being responsive to the field and my staff, I just want to say that this is the opportunity to continually raise questions or concerns so that we can make a commitment to you to revisit that in future iterations. It's not the goal to have a version 74 or a version 79 of the policy, but it certainly is our commitment to helping programs to understand and make sure that our expectations are clear and supportive.
I think we got most of the frequently asked questions. We will put these together and put together an FAQ for the field. Check the chat.
I'm seeing again more questions come in about what if licensors are not agreeing with the director's discretion. I just want to say that the review of staff files is primarily focused on BRC suitability, first aid CPR certification, and early ed essentials completion. That are the fundamental tenets for supporting health and safety for children in the classroom. The teacher qualifications process is something that we will work to support and understand. For those of you who would like to ask questions of the licensors are prepared to receive those questions. And for those that they're unable to answer, we'll escalate to their supervisor. Everyone is getting accustomed to the new policy and is committed to working collaboratively to solve for whatever miscommunication may come up. I am seeing a little bit more around uncertainty on qualifying experience. I think that the uncertainty is also very real because we are giving the opportunity for programs to define for themselves what qualifying experience is. So we know specifically that there are programs that have continually raised to us that our regulations did not adequately represent the experience that they valued as employers for teachers they were hiring and recruiting. The intent of this policy was to give you all the autonomy to better define what qualifying experience is. I'm seeing questions on reference checks. As a reminder, that is an employer decision. So you can either use the work experience forms, the coursework experience and diplomas and certificates and transcripts, or you can require reference checks. That's an employer decision, but is certainly an added check and balance.
So a few more questions came in about using the forms. EEC is providing the educator qualifications application form for you to use as a guide to keep on file at your program. And that will be on our website as well.
So I just want to reiterate that licensing's role is to ensure compliance to our regulations and to support you all in asking and answering questions pertaining to the implementation of this policy. You are still expected to adhere to the policy, and outlined within that are the requirements for both work experience and coursework experience. My talking points on this webinar are really just to reassure you that it is neither the role of TQ nor the licensor to verify or to validate those documents when they're on site supporting you as a program. So I just want to reiterate that. All right, I'm seeing the questions slow down. I want to give folks a couple of more minutes just to make sure that we've resolved some of these questions. And yes, clarifying that the existing qualifications are still applicable. The intent with the policy was to add additional options or flexibilities. And the new professional registry, people are asking if there's a verification component with that registry with higher ed, and that has not yet been scoped, but is certainly a wonderful suggestion. So thank you. Some questions around process and just the TQ unit. This is not a long-term strategy by any means, but is an interim support as we design a more comprehensive credential that supports programs in hiring and identifying candidates who meet the competencies that we've identified as most important to supporting children and families. And so this is a little bit of a preview in terms of the path that we want to move towards so that we can offer more flexibility to programs to make independent hiring decisions. No one should be pursuing additional credits to meet their existing qualifications. And so I just want to clarify that the intent of the policy is to both honor those who have already received certificates, reflect on the existing qualifications, and then have additional opportunities or flexibilities to provide more opportunities for immediate hire. Again, you can reach out directly to the Teacher Qualifications Unit with questions. When you receive a visit from your licensor or any other support staff at EEC, you're encouraged to reach out and offer questions or opportunities for further guidance. We've been receiving a lot of great feedback directly through the commissioner's inbox. I always encourage folks, if there are larger concerns that you think need to be addressed by leadership, to triage and to support with delivering that message through the commissioner's inbox as well. For individual applications or very specific needs, that should probably be best raised to the TQ unit, who are best equipped and prepared to provide those responses. All right, well, as we end our first virtual office hours, I just want to thank everyone again for the time and for the constructive feedback over the past 2 days regarding the policy. I've been telling my team this has been certainly a large undertaking for the agency, but it's one that we really felt committed to. And the intent, as we've stated before, was to provide as much support and flexibility to the field as we possibly could. And so I really appreciate your trust and your commitment to understanding that intent when you offer this constructive feedback about ways that we could better support or better structure the policy to meet your hiring needs. It is equally important to us that we protect the health and safety of children and families, but also support you in identifying qualified candidates to support hire in your program. So thank you all so much, and I really appreciate your time.
Bye all.
Well, I think we can end the meeting. Thank you.